we are going to solve some tutorial problems that will sort of hopefully clarify the ideas that we have learned in the last two lectures of mine. We can skip question number 1. It just asks, in case you don't have the document, then perhaps you don't know what example 2 is. It just asks you to prove that, asks you to verify that the set of integers, the set of polynomials, one variable polynomials, these are rings, these are examples of commutative rings. You can try also, not a problem. Show that Z is a ring, this is a ring, commutative ring. Well, this also is a commutative ring. This is also a commutative ring. This means this is a new thing that we are seeing. This is the set of all two variable polynomials. So it looks something like this. Alpha, every element in this set looks something like this. Alpha 0 0 plus alpha 1 0 times xi 1 plus alpha 0 1 times xi 2 plus alpha 1 1 times xi 1 xi 2 plus alpha 2 0 times xi 1 squared plus alpha 0 2 times xi 2 squared, and so on, finitely many terms, of course. This is a two variable polynomial ring. You can show that you can multiply two variables, two variable polynomials. You can add two variable polynomials, you can subtract two variable polynomials. There is 0 there, there is 1 there. Okay. You can also show that R xi 1 xi 2 dot 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 xi n, this also is a commutative ring. These are very simple. It's very simple to show that these are commutative rings. You can also show that if you have something like this, then this also is a commutative ring. What does this mean? Well, this is exactly like the polynomial ring. Only thing is, here the coefficients are no longer real numbers, the coefficients are just integers, integer numbers. So something like say xi squared plus xi plus 1 is a polynomial here, but unlike the previous case, if we have xi square plus 0.5 xi plus 1, then this is not a polynomial here. You can check that this set also is a polynomial ring, is a commutative ring. Everybody has a copy of this, every table? You can come and collect. Is that fine? Can we move over to the next problem? This is very simple, you can try at home also. Question 2 is something interesting. I want you to think about it, and then I want one of you to come up with a solution, and you can come here and share the solution with us. Question 2, let me repeat. It says that show that the set of all smooth functions is a commutative ring. We also ask what is the multiplicative identity here. Then we give a description of a set, a subset of smooth functions, which is the collection of all smooth functions that are 0 over the open interval -1 to 1. And we asked that show that this particular subset, which collects all the functions which are 0 over this interval, is an ideal. So think about it. Let's say for about 2-3 minutes. Smooth functions are functions that are infinite times differentiable. That means you can differentiate them as many times as possible. They will never show any problem. For example, yes, exponential functions, sinusoidal functions. There are many functions which are infinite times differentiable. There are many functions which are not infinite times differentiable. For example, if you have, suppose this is t, and over that suppose we have a function that is parabolic. So this is y equals x squared when x is positive. When x is negative, suppose it is 0. Yeah, y is a function of x. So, oh sorry, it is let us write x here. Yeah, fine. It is twice differentiable. In fact, it is. So if you differentiate it once, let us see what happens. Yeah. So if we differentiate it once, we get x, and here it is 0. Correct. So it is once differentiable. You differentiate it once, you indeed get a continuous function. Can you differentiate it again? If you differentiate it again, and this is y dot. If you differentiate it again, something funny happens. For x positive, the derivative is plus 1. For x negative, the derivative is 0. So this is not a continuous function, which means this function is not differentiable. Well, to be more precise, it is not continuously differentiable, because once you differentiate it, you get something that is not even continuous. That happens because there is this sharp edge here. See, there is this sharp edge. Differentiable means that it is smooth always. You can define the tangent at every point. But if you want to define the tangent at this point, you run into a problem, you run into ambiguity. Is the tangent like this, or is the tangent like this? That is not clear at this point. At every other point it is clear. Like for every positive x, it is clear that the tangent is this, and for every x negative, the tangent is this. But at this point there is an ambiguity. That is why it is not differentiable at this point. But smooth functions mean that such problems will not arise. Pardon?
Whether the second function is not differentiable or third one is?
The second one is itself not differentiable. Third one is not even continuous. Second one is continuous but not differentiable.
But if we take the differentiation of 2x, we get the 2, that is constant function. So that is differentiable.
2x is differentiable if the function is 2x, but this function is not exactly 2x. It is 2x for x positive and it is 0 for x negative, which is not 2x. So 2x would look something like this. Yeah, but this is different from this one.
With the interval.
Exactly, it is with that interval that is happening. So at every other point you can define the derivative, but at this point you cannot define the derivative. Because if you remember, the derivative is defined as left hand limit, right hand limit. I mean, you see, you remember this thing, no? F of alpha plus h minus f of alpha divided by h with limit h tending to 0. Now, in this case, if alpha, you take alpha to be equal to 0, and then from, if you take the limit h tending to 0 plus, you get plus 2 as your answer. On the other hand, if you take limit h tending to 0 minus, you get 0 for your answer. So the two limits don't match. That is why at this point this function is not differentiable. But we are considering functions which are differentiable infinitely many times. That symbol is, sorry, oops. Third is not even continuous, so no question of differentiability. Okay, the question in the tutorial sheet asks us to find out that this set of all infinitely differentiable functions, this forms a ring. If it is too difficult for you, you can consider set of all just continuous functions. Well, try this one. This is not difficult. Try this one. TST means to show that. So what do we need to show in order to verify that a given set is a commutative ring? All those properties, 8 properties, right? So first let us see whether there are two operations defined or not. Is addition well defined?
Yes.
Yes, you can add two functions and get another function, and if both the functions are differentiable infinitely many times, their sum is also differentiable. Sir, you would like to come and share?
I will be taking two functions, f1t I am considering these two functions are continuous functions. So the first property, that is addition of two continuous function, whatever sir said, if we add two continuous function, we get the continuous function. So let us say gt, this addition property is satisfied, and this commutative property also, if we add f1t plus f2t, which is also equal to f2t plus f1t, commutative property is also satisfied. Addition is associative and commutative, that also easily satisfied. Let us consider three functions, f1t plus f2t. If these two functions, they are continuous, and one more function, let us take f3t, can always be written as f1 of t plus f2t plus f3t. Here also there is no problem. So additive property is always true. Addition of function is equal to, in any order if you add functions, the result will be same. Multiplication of two functions, multiplication also f1 of t into f2 of t, which is equal to f2t t into f1 of t. Here also there is no problem. We can multiply it in two functions in any order. The result will be same. Multiplication, distribute over addition. Here also I don't think there is any problem. f2t plus f3t. Here multiplication is getting distributed over addition.
Correct. And one more thing that you should notice is that when you take the product of two functions, if both the functions are differentiable, then the product is also differentiable by the product rule, right? f1 f2 derivative is f1 f2 prime plus f1 prime into f2. Yeah.
Yes, and this one existence of identity. So this is continuous function which is existing from both the side, minus infinity to plus infinity.
Yeah.
So here, if there is f1 of t, we always have inverse of that. F1
First
of
we
t
need
is
to
there,
show
it means
additive identity.
additive identity.
Yeah,
If
we have to
f1 of t
identify.
is there, it means f1 of minus t is also there.
No,
in
not
that
f1 of minus t, sir.
minus
First you have to take the additive identity, that should be the zero function.
Yeah, sorry.
The function that is zero for all
function.
time.
So f1 of t plus 0. So it is identity exists.
Yeah,
Existence
identity
of-
exists. Existence of identity. Exactly.
I was talking about existence of
Inverse,
inverses.
inverse, yeah.
So if there exists f1 of t,
Hmm.
so we can say always f1
Minus-
minus f1 of t is also
exactly.
possible.
Minus of f1t.
So that which is equal to identity.
Exactly.
Existence is over, and one is always there because you are saying, but one is not a continuous function, sir.
1 is a continuous function for all.
Okay, if it is there from
If
minus
it is-
infinity to plus
exactly, if it is from minus infinity
so
to infinity.
if okay, multiplicative identity 1 into f1 of t
Correct.
is always equal to
So this 1
Yeah,
is
1
actually
into-
function 1, which is 1 for all time.
yeah
For all
time.
t.
It
For
is-
all t it is
yeah, it is-
constant 1.
yeah.
Yeah.
f1 of t
Hmm. Very good.
into 1. So this is also f1 of t. I think everything is over, sir.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay,
you, sir.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you so much.
Sorry.
Thank you. So we might also wish to check that in this particular case, when you look at C infinity functions, smooth functions, the fact that not all smooth functions are invertible, that it does not form a field, that is also interesting to note here. For example, you can have a continuous, in fact a smooth function which is okay, which is something like this, say a bell-shaped curve. Yeah, we can make such a function which is differentiable infinitely many times, but it has the property that outside an interval it is always 0. Is this function invertible? Meaning, if we have f, if we call this function ft, would it make sense to define gt which is equal to 1 over ft for all time? Yes, no, it is not defined, because you see there are some times for which it is 0, and at those points this function would be undefined. That is why functions may not have inverses. On the other hand, if f is non-zero everywhere, then it is invertible. So that is why this forms a commutative ring but not a field, where there are some elements for which there is an inverse, but there are some elements for which there are no inverses defined. Okay? All right. In that same, it's a commutative ring. It's not a field. Not a field. It's a commutative ring, but not a field. Now the second part asks us to do the following. So we define this set S, which is collection of all ft such that ft when evaluated on this interval gives us 0. So, for example, this constant function, constant function 1, this is not a part of this set because it is non-zero everywhere. This set contains only those continuous functions, C infinity functions in fact, which are 0 over this interval. We would like to show that this set is an ideal. So, do I have a volunteer? Anyone? Ashok, you're Ashok, right?
Yeah.
Ashok, would you like to try? Very simple. What do you need to check for an ideal? For some set to be an ideal, what do you have to check? Yes, Rajnikant? Yes, for exactly. Exactly. So, if we have one function f1t which is in S and another function f2t which is also in S, we have to check that f1 plus f2 is also in S. Is that true? Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Back there? So, f1 is defined on this is 0 on this interval, f2 is also 0 in this interval. So, when you do f1 plus f2, it is on that interval it is 0 plus 0, right. So, it is 0 again. So, indeed f1 plus f2 is in S. Now, suppose I take an arbitrary f, I take an arbitrary f in S and an arbitrary g in the set of all smooth functions, and then I do g times f. What happens to this function when it is evaluated on this interval? Pardon?
Will be in the S.
It will be in S because when you evaluate this, 0 into anything is 0, exactly. Yeah, so then it is indeed an ideal. Is it finitely generated? So, S is an ideal, but unfortunately it is not finitely generated. It is difficult to show that it is not finitely generated, but you have to take my word for it for the time. You can try and see why is this not finitely generated. Like here, the GCD kind of ideas is not going to work. For polynomials, it did work, but for such things, GCD idea may not work. Is it? Okay, finitely generated means that you can find out generators, you can find out functions here. So, we are asking the question that given this S, does there exist functions f1, f2 up to let us say fr, finitely many of them, such that is this true? So, what does this symbol mean here? This symbol would mean here that we are looking at things like this m1 f1 plus m2 f2 plus dot 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 up to mr fr, where this mi's, these coefficients, they are also functions, they are also C infinity functions. So, we are asking the question that is it possible that every function in S can be written as a linear combination of functions, finitely many functions? Well, the answer is no, it's not true, you cannot write it. Yeah, it's difficult to see here, but the dimension is so big of the space it's an infinite dimensional vector space, so you cannot find out finitely many generators, something like that. But to give rigorous proof would be difficult.
Finite set of functions.
Finite set of functions will not suffice.
Though finite set of functions, they are infinite in nature.
Yeah, correct. You might see with f1 up to, suppose you pick some functions which all of them are from S, and then you look at their all possible such combinations, you get some ideal,
Yes.
but still there would be something beyond that
Yes.
which is there in the set S.
Got it.
Okay, question 3 is an interesting one. We will not do it here, we don't have much time, but it's a nice exercise and I urge all of you to do it at home. So if we have GCD of, so this is what enables us to carry out the Euclidean division algorithm to find out GCD of multiple numbers or multiple polynomials. So here we are saying that ABC are 3 integers, then GCD of ABC, we are saying that first find GCD of AB, then find out the GCD of that with C, that should be equal to the GCD of ABC. And then it does not matter if you interchange the order of doing these operations. So GCD of AC and the GCD of that with B, that is also same as the ones that we have calculated before, and so on. It's a nice exercise, logical exercise. I urge all of you to do it at home. Okay, let's move to question number 4, which is very interesting, and I most certainly want one volunteer to solve this. Whoever solves this is certainly deserves a gift.
Polynomial.
Oh,
PID is what?
okay, we have not defined what is PID. Okay, good. PID. How many of you have heard this term before? In control systems you have proportional, integral and derivative. It doesn't have anything to do with this PID. Okay, this PID means the following. P stands for principal, I stands for ideal, and D stands for domain. Let me explain this term from this right side. What is a domain? A domain is a commutative ring where we have the property that if we have two elements from the commutative ring A and B, and their product when we look, we get the additive identity, that is 0, then this should necessarily mean that either A is equal to 0 or B is equal to 0 or both A and B are equal to 0. If that happens, then this set is called, and this commutative ring is called a domain. Sometimes it is also called an integral domain. So have we seen integral domains before? Yes, we have indeed. The set of integers is an integral domain. You multiply two non-zero integers, you always get a non-zero number, non-zero integer. You don't get 0. For polynomials also it is true. But there are certain cases where you can have non-zero numbers multiplied and you still get 0. So those of you who have seen modulo operations, you have seen modulo operations before? Yeah, so let's say Z6. Z6 is the set 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. This finite set where addition and multiplication are defined as modulo operations. You add, multiply and then you divide by 6 and take the remainder. In that case you can see if you look at 2 and 3 and multiply, you get 6. but 6 when you divide by 6 you get remainder 0. So 2, 3 multiplied gives you 0. So this is not an integral domain. Yeah, but the kind of things that we have seen, for example the integers, it's an integral domain. Polynomials, that is also an integral domain.
For integral domain?
Pardon?
What should be the answer for integral domain? It is not integral domain means?
It is not integral domain means that here there are two non-zero numbers.
Okay.
You multiply, you still get 0. Yeah, just one counter example and it is good enough to not qualify as an integral domain. In order for this to be an integral domain, we should never be able to find out such an example. You see, it should always happen that if we have a times b equal to 0, then one of them has to be necessarily 0, which is true for integers. In integers, if somebody gives us, tells us that okay, this is an integer and their product is 0, then you can certainly say that okay, either a is 0 or b is 0 or both are 0, otherwise it's not possible. So Z is indeed an integral domain, just Z is a domain. What is principal ideal? Well, ideal we know, we have seen ideals. What is principal? Principal means an ideal, okay, so principal ideal means that it is an ideal which is generated by a single element. Someone can give me a weird description of an ideal, but then finally I do some jugglery and find out one generator, that ideal has all the elements which are multiple of this particular element. Then we say that this ideal is a principal ideal. We have already seen that the polynomial ring in one variable over a field is a principal ideal domain. Why? Okay. So what is a principal ideal domain? I have explained what is a domain and I have explained what is a principal ideal. Principal ideal domain means that it is an integral domain. So listen carefully. It is an integral domain where every ideal is principal. That means for every ideal you will be able to find out one generator which generates the entire ideal. For every ideal you will be able to do that. For polynomial rings we have done this. You remember, right, that somebody gives us an ideal, we look at the polynomial in that ideal which has least degree, and then we have shown that that particular polynomial in fact generates the entire ideal. Yeah. So polynomial rings are indeed PIDs, they are principal ideal domains. The question that is being asked here is to show that the set of integers is also a principal ideal domain. Well, one part is already clear, that Z is indeed an integral domain, that we don't have to prove. All we have to prove is that given any ideal A in Z, A is principal, which would mean there exists a number n such that the ideal A is equal to the set of all multiples of n. This is what we have to show. And I need a proof from you. If you need hint, I can give you some hint.
ideal generator.
We have to find out the generator.
It's one.
No, the one generates everything. So it generates the entire ring. Now suppose we have the ideal, let's say, as we looked at as we have seen before. Suppose we have 8 and no, not 8, let's say 24 and 36. We have the ideal generated by 24 and 36. Is this generated by a single element? Yes, it is. How do you know? Not 6, not 6, something beyond that. 12. How do you know? 12 is the GCD. Yes, 12 is the GCD. So GCD will indeed generate. In fact, if you have N1, N2, N3, this also is same as GCD of N1, N2, N3. But how do you prove it? It's a good guess, it's a correct guess, but how do you prove it? And in fact there is a crispier proof which does not require you to find out the GCD, but still you can show that there is a single generator. Why don't you try with GCD? I will tell you what is the problem with the proof using the GCD, but at least as a first attempt, can anyone tell me why should this proof work out? Let's say we want to prove this. If there are N1, N2, N3, then the ideal generated by N1, N2, N3 is the same as the ideal generated by their GCD. Ashok, you want to try? Yeah? Anyone else? So at least one side of the proof should be obvious, no? Showing one set is contained in the other. Which one? Correct. Exactly. Right. So then any linear combination of the form M1 N1 plus M2 N2 plus M3 N3, this can be written as M1 times some Q1 times N plus M2 times some Q2 times N plus M3 times Q3 times N, which is same as which means what we have essentially shown is this. Anything here is also a part of here. What about the other containment? How do we show that anything that is a multiple of the GCD is also a part of this ideal generated by N1, N2, N3? That would require us what? Aryabhatta identity. Yes, Aryabhatta identity. But we have not seen that yet. You can do that. You can prove Aryabhatta Bezu identity for integers also, but we have not done that in class. You can take it as an exercise. What I would like to, so this is okay, but now let me point out a problem, shortcoming of this proof. Suppose we use Aryabhatta identity and prove this thing, but there is a shortcoming here. What is the shortcoming? The shortcoming is that here we already assume that the ideal that was given to us is generated by this finitely many elements. But when an ideal is given to us abstractly, we may not even have such finitely many generators. We might just have a description of all the elements in the ideal. We know all the elements that are there, but we don't know that they are, linear combinations like this even. We don't even have any set of generators at all. We just have an arbitrary ideal. In that case, how do we show that there is a single generator? We cannot take GCD, right? If we want to take GCD, we have to take infinitely many elements and we have to take GCD of those. Now that is absurd. So in that case, what do we do? Without using the concept of GCD, what do we do? How can we prove that every ideal is generated by a single element? Every ideal is a principal ideal. Well, recall the similar proof that we have done in class. We did show before using Bezu identity and GCD that given the ideal, look at the polynomial in the ideal which has least degree, and then use Euclidean division to find out remainder and so on. Use that particular result. So that is a hint. Using that, can you show that every ideal is generated by a single element? So can anyone tell me what should be the version of Euclidean division in this case? Let me ease things a bit. Suppose m is a positive integer and n is also a positive integer, and suppose n is bigger than m. Yeah, n is bigger than m. Then what can you write? So fill in the blanks. You can write quotient and remainder, Q and R should satisfy. Where is degree? These are integers.
R should be less than?
R should be less than m, the divisor m. R should be strictly less than. These are all positive integers, remember. Now can you do the proof? Anyone? Please, I need a volunteer. Yeah.
Well, in this case, if n belongs to z
Mm-hmm.
and m belongs to z,
Mm-hmm.
so n minus q m will also belongs to z.
Mm-hmm. That's not going to help you much.
M and M both belongs to Z, then they should be equal.
No, Z, they are all from Z, no? Do you mean Z or A? Z is the set of all integers. So everything is integers here. So saying something belongs to Z does not tell us anything extra.
We have to prove that M and N are equal.
No, we have to prove the following, that somebody gives us an ideal, whatever it is, there is a single generator for that. That's what we have to prove. Somebody gives us an ideal, I give that person a generator. And I can do that for any arbitrary ideal. That is what we have done for polynomials. Somebody gave us a polynomial ideal in the polynomial ring. We gave that person a generator.
Is it that n1 equal to q1 n1 we can trust?
Pardon?
N1 equal to q1 n1 and then n1 n is equal to q1 n plus r1 so on.
A is an ideal. We want to find, okay, we want to show that there exists an n in this ideal such that A is equal to n, which means for all m in A, m must be of the form q times n. That is what we want to show. We want to show existence of such an n, which is a generator. You want to try? But how do you know that the remainder is 0? You need to find this n. You need to give us a recipe of how to find out this n. Okay, let me give you the n and then you show that this is a generator. Is that a good deal? I will give you the n and then you will tell me that it is indeed a generator. You will tell me how to show that it is indeed a generator. Is that fine? Everybody with me? Yeah? Look at the ideal. Find out the smallest positive integer there. The smallest positive integer in the ideal. Needn't be 1. 1 wouldn't be there, right, in general. 1 is there in the ring, but it may not be there in the ideal, because if it is there in the ideal, then the ideal is entire thing. That doesn't make sense. I mean, that doesn't take us very far. Somebody gives us an ideal, arbitrary ideal. Well, 0 is there in the ideal, definitely. Yeah, because you see, if a number n is there in the ideal, then minus n is also there in the ideal, because it's minus 1 times n, and ideals are closed under multiplication from the ring. And when you add two things from the ideal, that is n minus n, which is 0, that must also be there in the ideal. So 0 is definitely there. There are positive integers, negative integers. The positive integers might start from 2, 4, 3, anything. If it starts from 1, then it has everything. I mean, the ideal is equal to the ring. There is nothing extra that you get. You see, nothing more important, nothing different from the ring that you get. Yeah. So
if n is equal to qm plus r, then as we know m belongs to ideal.
Okay, so here is the thing, here is the deal. So somebody gives us A and we choose n in A such that n is positive, that is n is greater than 0, and for all m that is there in A and m is greater than 0, we must have n to be less than or equal to m. Such a thing exists, right? You don't have. I guess we don't have any doubt about the existence of that n. Okay? Yeah. I say that this n is the generator in the ideal. smallest positive number in the ideal, that has to be the generator. How do we show this?
It will give all the multiples of other numbers which contain in the ideal.
Why? We can apply Euclidean division, precisely. First thing, we show that the ideal that n generates definitely is a subset of the original ideal that was given to us, because you see n was a part of this ideal, right? N was chosen to be a part of the ideal. So any multiple of that is also there in the ideal. So about this there is no doubt. The doubtful part is, why on earth should everything in the ideal be a multiple of n? That is what we need to show. Once again, we use contradiction. Suppose it is not. Suppose the ideal generated by n does not contain A. This would imply what? There exists an M which is in A, but n does not divide M. That is, M is not a multiple of n. Correct? Everybody with me? Sir? Is this all right?
Yes, sir.
Correct? So then by Euclidean division, okay, by the way, we can assume that M is positive, because if M is not positive, we multiply it by -1 and make it positive. It is still a part of the ideal. And if n is if M is not there in the not a multiple of n, minus M is also not a multiple of n. So M can be assumed to be positive. Now M by Euclidean division can be written like this, right? And R is strictly less than n. Now M is there in the ideal, n is there in the ideal, Qn is there in the ideal. This will prove that R is also there in the ideal, which is a contradiction unless R is 0, right? It's a contradiction because then we have a non-zero number in the ideal which is smaller than n, but that is impossible. N was chosen to be the smallest. That's it. This n is the generator. So exactly the same proof that we have worked out for polynomials works out here also for integers. So there are striking similarities between integers and one variable polynomials. Okay. Question number 5 is something interesting, you should try. We don't have time for that. Question 6 is also very interesting, but it's tedious. Once again, I urge you to do it at home. It is just Euclidean division, long division, and you have to calculate GCD of two polynomials by doing the division. Question 7 is very interesting. I want you to have a go at it. Once again, you think and then come up with an answer. Talk to your group partner and share the answer with us. Question 7, yeah. Question 7 is show that the only smooth function y, C infinity, that satisfies both the given equations is the zero function. No function other than the zero function can satisfy both the equations simultaneously. Yeah, tell, go ahead.
First of all, we convert it into a polynomial form. Both of this.
Correct.
Okay, we'll get the two polynomials.
Yes.
Then we find the GCD of that.
Yes.
We make it equal to 0. We prove that the GCD gives the solution that is equal to 0.
Yes.
Then that solution gives the answer.
Correct.
That's the way.
That's it, precisely.
Yeah.
So would you like to come here and
I need to do the division.
GCD calculation? Yeah, why don't you?
Okay, I will use another symbol for
xi.
Yeah, yeah.
So first polynomial equation will get, I'll put it in the form of let's say omega square plus omega plus 2 is equal to 0, and then omega cube plus 7 is equal to 0.
Don't write equal to 0. Huh?
Okay,
That
okay,
is
so
wrong
sorry.
impression.
Sorry,
Two polynomials.
these are the two polynomials. I'll call it as g1 and g2. We'll do the division of this, so it is like this. Okay, so we'll get here initially the omega, and here it is omega cube plus omega square plus 2 omega, that is
Minus omega
square minus 2 omega plus 7.
Perfect.
Okay, so here we'll get the this. Okay, here again we have to do the
Minus 1.
minus 1. Here minus 1, it is
Minus omega square.
minus omega minus 2. Okay, then this becomes omega minus omega plus 5. Okay, sorry, 9. Yeah. After this
This is the remainder.
remainder, yeah, we have to write in that form. Not we have
You
to
can
write
write omega minus 1.
minus 1 into that
omega minus 1.
divisor.
Why 1? It should be 9, no?
Omega minus 1 and
Okay.
another is
No, the GCD computation is not over yet.
okay.
You have a remainder. You have to use that remainder to divide omega square plus omega plus 2.
Same procedure you have to follow here. Okay, so we'll do this division. So it is minus omega, so it's sorry 9 omega 10 omega plus 2. Again
Minus 10.
it's minus 10 minus 90. Okay, plus 10 na?
Plus 10. So minus 10 you have to give. So that should be.
It becomes plus and then it becomes minus. Okay. This was 92.
Correct.
Okay, so
So what is the GCD then?
GCD is
The monic
Just
form of 92, which is 1.
1.
Correct? So
Yeah.
the GCD is 1.
1.
Which means solving these two equations, any y.
What I should write there?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
So any y that satisfies both these equations,
Any
write down
one.
the equations d square.
These two equations.
Yeah.
Okay.
So solving these two equations is same as solving GCD,
GCD
times
of
y is equal to
y is
0,
equal
right?
to 0.
But what is GCD? It is
1.
So 1 times y is equal to 0.
0. So y is equal to 0.
That is the only solution.
That is the only solution.
Another direct way of doing this is once you do this GCD computation, once you are done with the GCD computation, which happens to be just 1, then you can write by Aryabhatta-Bezu identity that 1 is equal to, that 1 is equal to, from here you can derive, let me not write it, some a d dt times d square y forget it. You can write 1 to be equal to some a xi g1 xi plus b xi g2 xi, and then from here you can argue that if y satisfies both the equations that g1 d dt y equal to 0, g2 d dt y is equal to 0, that would mean y is equal to a d dt g1 d dt y plus b d dt g2 d dt y, but y satisfies both the equations, so this is equal to 0, this is equal to 0, this would imply y is equal to 0. So, the moment y satisfies these two equations, the moment we say y satisfies these two equations, this implies y has to be equal to 0. On the other hand, if y is equal to 0, then definitely y satisfies these two equations. So, this direction is also true. So, together y is the only possible, y equal to 0 is the only possible solution. So, 0 function is the only solution to these two equations. Very good, I am really happy that we have a solution to this problem. Okay, so we have time till 3:30, right? Yeah, this time I am not making any mistake. Yeah, we have time till 3:30. Question 8 is good. It has once again question 8 asks for the same polynomial as question 6. In question 6 you are supposed to find out the GCD. In question 8 you are supposed to find out the polynomials which appear, that is a and b, which appear in the Bezu-Aryabhatta identity. Yeah, so which is equally simple. Let me do question 10 for you. I will do it for you, don't worry. I want to do this because this will teach you a nice trick which might be helpful to you in your research. Yeah, something is very much lacking in the textbooks. The textbooks don't mention this thing very in a glorifying manner, I would say. It's not emphasized often, but it's a very nice trick to have in your collection of weapons. Yeah, maths is like tools for you to solve engineering problems. Yeah, so this is a very nice tool that you can have. Okay, so the problem is very simple. Yeah, we are given a polynomial xi squared plus xi plus 1, and we are given another polynomial f xi which is equal to, let us say, xi to the power 4 plus 1. We want to find out the remainder of f xi upon division by g xi. There is one more polynomial f2 xi which is xi cube plus 6 xi squared plus 11 xi plus 6. We would like to find out the remainder of f2 also upon division by g. We know how to do it, right? The long division process, which is a tedious process. No one can deny that it's a tedious process. I will show you a trick which will make this tedious process absolutely simple. It will look like magic, and unfortunately I don't have the time to clarify why this magic works. So you would have to do it on your own. In case you find any difficulties, you can contact me. We can discuss and demystify the magic. The magic is the following. Look at g xi. It is xi squared plus xi plus 1. In general, it would be some coefficient here and some coefficient here, right? A1 and A0. In this case, A1 is 1, A0 is also 1, right? Now, form this matrix, form this 2 by 2 matrix, 0, 1 here, and minus A0 minus A1. I am sure you have seen this matrix. This is the so called companion form matrix, right? We also have seen it while we were obtaining first order representations using the phase variable form. We are precisely doing the same thing here. In this particular case, because A0 is 1 and A1 is 1, what we should get here is 0, 1, minus 1, minus 1. Yeah? We need to find out the remainder, right? Here is the trick. We have to find out remainder of f1 xi, which is xi to the power 4 plus 1. Do the following. In this same polynomial, replace the xi by the matrix A. That will give you a matrix polynomial, right? In this case, it would be a to the power 4 for xi to the power 4, For 1 you have to give identity. So look at a to the power 4 plus identity, that will be a 2 by 2 matrix again. Look at the first row of that, first row of a to the power 4 plus identity. Let us do this calculation by hand. So we have 0 1 minus 1 1 minus 1. Suppose we square it first, what should we get? 0 minus 1 1 minus 1. This is a squared. A squared is equal to, well, this is minus 1 plus 1 and this is minus 1 and 0, right? This is a squared. A to the power 4 would be minus 1 1 minus 1 0 times minus 1 1 minus 1 0. What is this? This is plus 1 minus 1 0 and then minus 1 and 0 minus 1 plus 1 and 0, so plus 1 1 minus 1. Same polynomial we get, I mean same matrix we get, a to the power 4. So a to the power 4 plus identity would be 0 1 minus 1 minus 1 plus identity is 1 0 0 1, which will give us 1 1 minus 1 and 0. Look at the first row. Take this one, keep it as it is. Look at this one, put it here and multiply it by xi. So 1 plus xi. I say 1 plus xi must be the remainder. One plus xi has to be the remainder. Check it. So, okay, let us do the check. We have xi squared plus xi plus 1. We divided by we have to divide this divide by this the following, xi to the power 4 plus 1. We give the by xi squared first, that gives us xi to the power 4 plus xi cube plus xi squared. This cancels out, we have minus xi cube minus xi squared plus 1. We give by minus xi once, we have minus xi cube minus xi squared minus xi. This cancels out, this also cancels out, we have xi plus 1. Indeed, we were to find out remainder of another polynomial. We had xi cube plus 6 xi squared, this was f2 xi, 6 xi squared plus 11 xi plus 6. How do I find out the remainder? Well, very simple, do f2 of a, which would be a cube plus 6 times a squared plus 11 times a plus 6 times identity. This will be a 2 by 2 matrix. We will have some entry here, some entry here, some entry here, some entry here. We pick this out and write it here, and then we pick this out plus this same side. This would be the remainder. You can go ahead and check.
The second row, what is that?
Second row, you tell me, what does it mean? No, it's not the question. It's not the question, unfortunately. So the trick is the following. If somebody gives us an nth degree polynomial which looks like a0 plus a1 xi plus dot 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 up to a n minus 1 plus xi to the n minus 1 plus xi to the n. If we have a polynomial like this, we write down this matrix A, which is the companion matrix. And then if somebody gives us another polynomial f psi and asks us to find out the remainder corresponding to this polynomial upon division by g psi, all we need to do is we replace psi by the companion matrix Fa, companion matrix A. This will give us a matrix polynomial. When we evaluate, we are going to get this to be an n by n matrix. In that n by n matrix, look for the first row. In the first row, suppose the entries are like this. Suppose this is B0, B1 up to Bn minus 1. Then from this, form the polynomial B0 plus B1 times psi plus B2 times psi squared plus dot 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 up to Bn minus 1 times psi to the n minus 1. See, the remainder can have degree at most n minus 1. So this is enough. This should be the remainder. This should be the remainder. So nice, no?
This matrix is called
The companion matrix. Companion matrix. In particular, if you take for f psi, if you take the same g psi, the same polynomial from which you have found out the companion matrix. Suppose for f psi you take g psi. What should you get for GA? What should be GA? GA turns out to be 0, because you see, if you look at g psi and divide by g psi, you get remainder to be equal to 0, right? So that tells us the first row has to be 0. Now, what is the second row? That was the question, right? What does the second row mean? Second row means it is the remainder upon division of psi times f psi. Yeah? So in this case it will be psi times g psi. So if you divide psi times g psi by psi, then once again the remainder is 0. So the second row will also be 0. Third row will also be 0. All the rows will be 0. Yeah, and this tells us that the entire matrix GA will be the 0 matrix, and this is the celebrated Cayley-Hamilton theorem. Cayley-Hamilton theorem says that every matrix satisfies its characteristic polynomial. Well, for the companion matrix G psi indeed is the characteristic polynomial, and G of A is equal to 0. Yeah. Okay, so this brings us to an end. I hope you enjoyed these lectures. Thank you.